Before I start with my official remarks, I just want to say, yo, Brooklyn in the house. So, good morning. I want to thank Bill Carlson and those of you who organized Cafe Con Tampa for inviting me to speak this morning. I also want to thank all of you for the welcome, and I look forward to hearing your questions. Your reputation precedes you as attentive, curious, and vocal. In other words, you're my kind of people. So most importantly, I get to share with you about the best little radio station on the planet, WMNF. And many of us who work there say we're not going to a job, we're going to where we belong. But I'm starting at the end, so I'm going to hit the rewind button and get you all to where I am. And this is a key idea that I'll be referring to, which is meeting people where they are. The topic I'd like to discuss, I've titled Radio Isn't Dead, It's Hyperlocal Destination. But before I give you my definition for these words, I want to share with you what happens to somebody else. One of our programmers is in the Mass Communications Department of USF, and a select group of students were chosen to go on a special tour of one of our local television facilities. And during the class visit, the students met in a room with a few executives of the television station who were pitching how wonderful they are and how relevant it is to be working in television. One of the speakers added, because you know, radio is dead. And the WMNF programmer slams her hands on the table in front of her and says proudly, radio is not dead, I work in radio. And some of the folks laughed and said, oh really, which radio station did you work at? And she replied, WMNF. Well, those executives sheepishly hung their heads and said, well yeah, with the exception of WMNF, radio is dead. You work at a real radio station. Now, I heard that the press would be here, so I just want to make sure you understand that I have claimed literary license with that story. But I do believe that I captured the gist of what took place pretty fairly. There is this notion that radio is dead, and I'm going to explain to you what I think is happening. So first, people are getting their radio in a variety of places. Yes, I still call it radio. So if you listen to a podcast regularly, that's radio. Some of you have subscriptions to satellite radio. Some of you are using streaming services or one service, and for me this is all radio. But if I have to be more accurate, I'm going to call it audio-only content. Meaning that what WMNF puts out in the world is predominantly audio-only content. Radio. So people are getting their audio-only content in a variety of places. So as an audio content producer, how do I get people to find and listen to WMNF content? In other words, how do I meet people where they are? In our case, one of the first things I did when I became station manager was to create square icons for each public affairs show that we produce at WMNF. The web folks made a page for people to find all of our podcasts on one page. We also started making keywords about each of those shows more consistent on platforms like iTunes and Spotify, and attended to how WMNF provides public affairs on Florida environmental issues, Florida politics, local urban development. We also started making Google ads as more targeted for news to let people know that WMNF is a source for the topics that they are curious about. We're finding people who are searching for what we provide and making it easier for them to find us. Second, we're living through another media transition, and we do not yet know where it's heading. But we can see that it's different. What I mean is during the height of the pandemic, when people stayed home, broadcast listenership went down. More people discovered streaming services. The big tech companies launched more user-friendly streaming services with bigger libraries. As a bit of a social psychologist, I can say that people became more impatient. They wanted comfort, they wanted to make their world more comfortable, and find the content that would soothe them in a particular moment. So when I'm out and about at events like this one, I like to share that WMNF programmers are feeling this moment with you. Now that many people are back in their cars, people are coming back to terrestrial radio. And we see this in our Nielsen numbers. The audience numbers during drive times are going up, and there are other pre-pandemic behaviors that are also showing up in those Nielsen numbers. But at satellite radio stations, streaming services, and even most other broadcast stations, there's just an algorithm at the other end. And what I mean is that even when you hear a DJ on those stations, Their DJs go to the station where someone hands them a script where they may or may not be allowed to ad-lib, and they pre-record days of shows in advance, which is then input with the playlist created by other people into the shows. So there's very little human input, let alone actual live human interaction. At WMNF, at least once a week, a programmer is contacted by phone, text, email, and told, "How did you know I was just thinking about that song?" And I can the programmers playing a particular song because they're feeling this moment live with everyone else who's listening live. And if you're listening to podcasts, then you know they're pre-recorded. As a producer, I can tell you that many of those shows are pre-recorded months in advance. So that's not really particularly timely information. And the Tampa-St. Pete Clearwater market is 17th largest in the country. And I don't need to remind anybody in this room that we have one newspaper that's printed twice a week. Around the country, newspapers are going under, or becoming regionalized, nationalized, and broadcast newsrooms are getting smaller. When I worked in the newsroom in the late 1990s and early 2000s, there were multiple stories on the AP feed to feed on a Thursday afternoon for a 5-minute headlines newscast. Now it's extremely hard to find one from the Associated Press. And often, it's not even the topic that WMNF covers. If you don't know WMNF, we're a mission-driven institution. And rather than delivering audio content for profit, we are a listener-supported community radio station that celebrates cultural diversity, promotes community engagement, and is committed to equality, peace, and economic justice. We provide content with a grassroots local emphasis that promote creative, musical, and political vitality. In other words, I got the best job on the planet. So from what I witnessed and see in fundraising history is that people respond to locally produced content that connects local events to what's going on in the rest of the world. We have to explain how covering up community parks that are 10 to 15 feet above sea level with a 10-story building at the same time storage surges are growing to 20 feet, flooding is going to be an issue. And if you were paying attention, there's a 5-foot deficit. So when they say we're going to get this storm surge, that's why. But we also have to attend to the cost and availability of affordable housing at the same time. At least the WMNF listener understands that these are not isolated issues, but connected to one another as environmental and economic justice. And when we explain these connections, we get listener engagement as phone calls, emails, letters, and yes, donations. So to wrap it up, radio is not dead because people are still seeking out audio-only content that matters to them. Not everyone is swiping left on TikTok all day long. Podcast use rose significantly during the height of the pandemic, and terrestrial radio listeners are going back to their cars. Additionally, younger folks, and I say this as someone who's approaching 60, I mean 35 plus, are seeking out the human connection that only exists on stations like WMNF. And sometimes the destination isn't Tampa or Dunedin or Lakeland. Sometimes it's the best jazz show with one of the best jazz announcers on the radio. Sometimes the destination is finding out about arts collectives, civil rights leaders, or cancer survivors in more than a feel-good 3 minutes. So this is my premise to discuss. People are seeking audio-only content that is hyperlocal destination, and I look forward to our conversation.